It was supposed to be just another carefully choreographed royal flight. Secure. Monitored. Untouchable. But somewhere between takeoff and cruising altitude, something went wrong. A silent anomaly. A deviation no one was meant to notice. And at the center of it all, Prince George. What began as routine transport would unravel into one of the most alarming breaches in modern royal history, exposed not by intelligence services, but by William's own pilot. For the public, royal travel appears effortless, a brief wave, a smiling arrival, a seamless descent from sky to ceremony. But beneath that polished surface lies an intricate web of protection. Every journey taken by Prince George is wrapped in layers of secrecy. Flight plans are drafted, then redrafted. Routes are altered at the last possible moment. Aircraft identifiers are masked behind coded manifests. Alternate landing strips are prepared in silence. Even the timing of departure is often disguised within routine air traffic chatter. Nothing is left to chance. Or so they believed. This particular journey was considered low risk. A short domestic flight, clear skies, a crew long vetted and trusted, classified internally as standard secure. No red flags, no heightened alerts. The kind of movement the palace performs dozens of times a year without incident. George, still young enough to see flying as an adventure rather than a protocol-laden operation, boarded unaware of the machinery of protection humming quietly around him. In the cockpit, William's trusted pilot followed procedure with practiced calm. He had flown dignitaries through volatile airspace. He had navigated combat zones under pressure. Compared to that, this was simplicity itself. And yet, halfway through ascent, a flicker caught his eye. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a brief anomaly within the aircraft's signal readouts, a ripple in the transponder data. It lasted seconds, then disappeared. He checked again. Another irregularity. Subtle, almost shy. An unregistered handshake attempting to mirror the aircraft's position. It did not belong to air traffic control. It did not match any scheduled escort. It felt curious, intrusive. He informed the onboard security officer. The response was swift but dismissive, likely atmospheric distortion, possibly equipment echo. Modern aviation systems are complex, they reminded him. Glitches happen, especially when encrypted channels shift frequencies mid-flight. The aircraft remained stable. No alarms were triggered. No visible threat emerged. Protocol dictated calm. But instinct is not protocol. The pilot had learned long ago that danger rarely announces itself with fireworks. It whispers. It probes. It tests the edges. And what he was seeing did not resemble random interference. The signal adjusted when they adjusted. It lingered just long enough to suggest intelligence behind it. Then it retreated, as if satisfied. He felt it in his gut, the unmistakable awareness that something, or someone, had been watching. He said nothing more during the remainder of the journey. Outwardly, the flight continued without disruption. George remained unaware, protected within the illusion of normalcy. Yet the pilot's focus sharpened. He tracked every fluctuation, memorized timestamps, logged quiet deviations that most would overlook. By the time descent began, his earlier calm had hardened into certainty. This was not atmospheric. This was not mechanical. This was deliberate. And as the aircraft touched down smoothly, greeted by routine ground security and the comforting choreography of royal arrival, the world saw only another flawless execution of duty. No sirens. No panic. No sign that anything had shifted. But inside the cockpit, beneath the surface of professionalism, a realization had taken root, chilling, undeniable, and heavy with implication. This was not an accident. It was a test. And the moment the wheels touched down, the real turbulence began not in the sky, but behind palace walls. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't royal. He didn't crave attention. But he knew what he saw and what he felt. Years of military aviation had trained him to recognize danger before it announced itself. When William's trusted pilot reviewed the flight data that night, the truth was impossible to ignore. Someone had breached the unbreachable, and his choice to speak would ignite a storm Buckingham Palace was desperate to contain. He had built his life in the disciplined silence of the Royal Air Force, where instinct meant survival and hesitation could cost lives. Elite clearance, combat-tested reflexes, a reputation for precision under pressure. He was not easily rattled, and he certainly was not prone to paranoia. That was precisely why Prince William trusted him. When the time came to appoint a pilot responsible for transporting the future of the monarchy, the decision was deliberate, not flashy, not political, just absolute trust. Over time, that professional relationship deepened into something quieter and more personal. William valued competence, but he valued loyalty even more. This pilot had both. He understood discretion. He understood the unspoken weight of carrying a child who was not merely a son, but a symbol. Their conversations were often brief, focused, grounded in shared discipline. Two men shaped by duty, bound by responsibility. But that night, long after the aircraft had landed and formalities were completed, the pilot sat alone with the data. At first, it looked like noise lines of numbers, encrypted pings, coded timestamps. Then patterns began to form. A signal that matched their altitude shifts with unsettling precision. A triangulation attempt that had no business being there. It wasn't random interference. It tracked them, followed them, adjusted when they adjusted. His pulse slowed, not quickened. That was always his response to real danger clarity instead of panic. Then he found it. 47 seconds. A brief but deliberate transponder disruption. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to ground the flight. Just enough to test access. To measure vulnerability. To confirm capability. Someone had reached into a secure royal aircraft and touched its digital spine. The implications were staggering. This was more than curiosity from an amateur hacker. The encryption alone would have deterred most attempts. Whoever orchestrated this knew what they were doing, and worse, they had chosen their target carefully. Prince George. The pilot leaned back, feeling the weight settle in his chest. He had sworn loyalty to the crown. Loyalty demanded discretion. Palace protocol required reporting anomalies through established security channels. Quietly. Systematically. Without disruption. But something inside him resisted the usual chain of command. Because this was not merely a technical irregularity, it was a warning. He thought of William not the prince delivering speeches, not the future king preparing for history, but the father who had buckled his son's safety harness before takeoff. The father who trusted the system implicitly because men like him were meant to guard it. Duty to the crown. Duty to truth. They did not always align. If he filed the report through standard channels, it could be buried under classification. Refrained as negligible, managed internally to avoid scandal. The monarchy survives on perception as much as protection, and this incident threatened both, but silence would make him complicit. The decision crystallized with brutal simplicity. He would go directly to William, not as an employee seeking permission, not as an alarmist chasing attention, but as a soldier delivering intelligence to a commander who deserved to know the battlefield had shifted. The meeting was arranged discreetly. No aides, no intermediaries, just data, hard evidence, and a truth that could not be softened. As he prepared to speak, he understood that once the words left his mouth, there would be no returning to routine. Because what he told William would shift the prince from father to future king in a single, chilling moment. Behind the crown, behind the protocols, behind the palace gates there is a father. And when William heard the words targeted signal interference linked to George's flight, something ancient and protective awakened. This was no longer about reputation or headlines. It was about blood, about legacy, about a son who had unknowingly flown through invisible crosshairs. The pilot did not exaggerate. He did not speculate. He simply laid out the data with the calm precision of a man trained to report threats. Altitude matching. Unauthorized triangulation. 47 seconds of deliberate transponder disruption. He finished speaking and allowed the silence to settle, heavy and unmovable. William's first reaction was disbelief. Not denial disbelief, the kind that comes when reality collides with assumption. Royal transport was meant to be impenetrable. The system had been built over decades, refined after tragedies, fortified against evolving dangers. It was not supposed to fail, not like this. Not so quietly. Then disbelief hardened into something else. Fury but controlled, measured, dangerous. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. He asked questions, precise and direct. Was there any chance it was random? Could it be equipment error? Had anyone else been informed? Each answer narrowed the space for comfort. Number. Unlikely. Not yet. This had been intentional. The room felt smaller, though no one said it aloud. The pilot watched the shift happen in real time. The father was still there, shaken, protective, but something larger was rising alongside him. The future king. A man who understood that threats against his son were not isolated acts. They were signals, tests of resilience, probes against the institution itself. Security advisors were summoned quietly. Their response was cautious, almost rehearsed. They advised discretion, internal review, containment, public silence. There was no confirmed breach of control, they argued. No physical danger had materialized. Raising alarm could invite speculation, embolden adversaries, destabilize confidence. William listened. He did not interrupt. But when they suggested the anomaly might remain classified and managed without escalation, the air shifted again. His tone sharpened, not louder but colder. He demanded independent verification of the flight data. External analysts. No filtering through palace optics. No dilution of language. If the aircraft had been digitally touched, he wanted proof beyond doubt, and he wanted it fast. Because this was not about optics. It was about vulnerability. Later, in private, he spoke with Catherine. There was no panic in her response, no visible unraveling, just a quiet intensity that cut deeper than anger. She asked practical questions. How close had it come? Could it happen again? Who else knew? Her strength did not come from denial, it came from clarity. She understood the symbolic weight of what had occurred. George was not only their child, he was continuity embodied, and someone had dared to trace his path through the sky. Together, they confronted the unspoken truth. If someone breached the airspace once, they could do it again. That possibility lingered like a shadow. It followed William into strategy meetings, into late-night briefings, into the stillness where doubt usually creeps in. But doubt was replaced by resolve. Whoever orchestrated this had not merely tested a plane. They had tested a father, and they had tested a future sovereign. What investigators uncovered next would reveal that this breach was not random, it was calculated. The aircraft systems were encrypted, military grade, impossible to penetrate at least in theory. Yet buried deep within the telemetry logs was a signature, a ghost signal, one that mirrored the plane's altitude changes in real time. Someone wasn't just observing, they were shadowing. And the more analysts dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't a lone hacker. It was coordinated. The independent verification William demanded began quietly but urgently. External cybersecurity experts were brought in under strict confidentiality, their access limited yet sufficient to dissect every byte transmitted during George's flight. What they found chilled even the most seasoned among them. The ghost signal wasn't random interference bouncing across frequencies. It was structured, responsive, adaptive. Every climb in altitude was matched within milliseconds. Every course correction was reflected in parallel. The unknown signal had not simply pinged the aircraft, it had mapped it. It moved like a digital echo with intent, adjusting speed and direction as though tethered invisibly to the jet's path. This was trajectory mirroring, a technique rarely seen outside state-level intelligence operations. Then came the 47 seconds. A small window, almost forgettable. During that interval, the aircraft's transponder flickered. Not entirely off, not enough to cause panic. Just a subtle disruption, a brief vulnerability. To the untrained eye, it might appear as routine system recalibration. But when placed alongside the ghost signal's synchronized movements, it told a darker story. Someone had tested the edges of access, touched the perimeter, verified reach, and then disengaged. The origin point was traced through layers of obfuscation, encrypted pathways bouncing through foreign servers and disguised networks. But beneath the camouflage, something startling emerged. The initial relay had begun domestically, not from a distant adversary probing from across continents, but from within national borders. Close enough to understand airspace regulations, close enough to exploit them. That revelation shifted the atmosphere instantly. The threat was no longer abstract. It was near. Palace the first teams worked around the clock, reconstructing digital footprints, cross-referencing timestamps with flight clearance communications. The more they examined the data, the more disturbing the pattern became. The ghost signal appeared within minutes of a last-minute route adjustment, a change communicated to a highly restricted group only hours before takeoff. That detail could not be ignored. Flight path alterations for royal travel are closely guarded secrets. They are shared on a need-to-know basis, encrypted and staggered to prevent exposure. Yet the signal had adapted almost instantly to that updated route, which meant one of two things. Either someone had breached encrypted palace communication systems, or someone with access had passed the information along. Both possibilities were explosive. The phrase insider knowledge began circulating in hushed tones. It was not spoken loudly, not yet, but it hung in every secure meeting. Was this an external cyber attack exploiting digital gaps? Or was it something more corrosive, a leak from within? Security protocol manuals were revisited. Clearance lists were scrutinized. Communication logs were dissected for anomalies. Every encrypted transmission surrounding the flight was examined as if it were a potential confession. No one wanted to believe the palace could be compromised from inside its own protective walls. And yet the evidence whispered otherwise. William absorbed each update with a tightening resolve. This was no longer just about external threats testing boundaries. It was about structural integrity, trust, loyalty, the invisible framework holding the monarchy together. Because if flight routes could be mirrored in real time, if encrypted systems could be nudged and probed without detection, then the breach was not random curiosity, it was rehearsal. And as whispers of an insider threat echoed through secure corridors, attention turned inward toward the palace itself. Royal crises are handled quietly, discreetly, erased before sunrise. But this was different. The breach touched the air's air. Some advisors urged immediate lockdown and silence, fearing public panic. Others warned that secrecy would embolden whoever orchestrated the intrusion. And caught between caution and confrontation stood William, forced to decide whether transparency was strength or vulnerability. Within hours of the domestic origin discovery, senior palace officials convened behind closed doors. Their instinct was almost automatic. Contain it. Classify it. Neutralize the narrative before it ever formed. The monarchy, after all, survives on stability. Public confidence is currency. Panic is poison. The official position forming around the table was clear. There had been no physical harm, no visible disruption, no confirmed takeover of systems. Therefore, there was no incident requiring disclosure. But the room was divided. Intelligence representatives, brought in under strict secrecy, offered a more strategic approach. They advised covert monitoring. Let the perpetrator believe the probe went unnoticed. Track the signal's next move. Trace communication patterns. Use silence as bait. To them, exposure risked spooking a sophisticated operator who might vanish before identification. William listened to each argument carefully, but his patience thinned with every carefully worded recommendation to avoid escalation. He understood institutional caution. He had grown up watching crises handled with surgical public relations. Scandals softened, narratives redirected, files sealed. There was history here, history of survival through silence. But this felt different. Because this was not a tabloid rumor. It was not a family disagreement. It was a direct challenge to security. His frustration surfaced in controlled bursts. Why had the signal not triggered automatic alerts? Why were encryption upgrades delayed pending budget reviews? Why was the assumption always to protect perception before confronting threat? Each question landed heavily. Some officials shifted uncomfortably. Others defended procedure. The tension in the room thickened. There were subtle references to past moments when royal vulnerabilities had been quietly managed. Situations the public never fully understood. Precedents that justified discretion. The implication was clear. The crown had endured by controlling its exposure. Why abandon that instinct now? William's response was measured but firm, because this time the target was his son. Catherine's influence became more visible in private consultations. She did not advocate reckless transparency, Nor did she support blanket secrecy. Instead, she pressed for a controlled disclosure strategy acknowledging an attempted digital interference without revealing operational weaknesses. It was a middle path: strength without panic, honesty without chaos. Her reasoning was simple. Silence could be interpreted as weakness if the story surfaced elsewhere. Meanwhile, the pilot found himself pulled deeper into the storm. What began as a professional report evolved into testimony. He was questioned repeatedly, his logs dissected, his instincts scrutinized. Some sought to minimize the anomaly, others relied on his credibility to validate escalation. Without intending it, he had become a central figure in a quiet power struggle between containment and confrontation. And beneath the debate, an unspoken fear lingered. What if the breach was not an isolated event? What if it was a calculated progression? That fear would soon be confirmed, because then came the revelation: no one was prepared for the breach had been rehearsed. When analysts widened the search, they found something chilling: smaller anomalies on previous royal flights, minor enough to dismiss, but together they formed a pattern. Test runs, calibration attempts. Whoever was behind the interference had been studying the royal flight network for months. And George's aircraft? It was simply the first major escalation. The deeper review began almost reluctantly. At first, investigators had focused solely on the recent incident, treating it as a contained digital assault. But one analyst, unsettled by the precision of the ghost signal, requested archived telemetry from earlier Royal Journeys flights carrying senior members of the family, routine trips long forgotten by the public. What surfaced was subtle, almost invisible. Brief signal flickers here, a handshake attempt there. Each instance too small to trigger concern at the time, logged and dismissed as technical noise. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they told a story. The anomalies followed a progression. Early pings lasted only seconds, crude and exploratory. Later attempts grew more refined, synchronizing more accurately with aircraft movement. It was as if someone had been learning, studying encryption responses, measuring firewall reactions, mapping the digital contours of royal air travel with patient precision. The implication was devastating. This was not a spontaneous strike, it was rehearsal. Each previous irregularity had been a quiet probe, testing how far access could reach without detection. And because those minor blips were dismissed as harmless, the unseen architect had grown bolder. By the time George's flight was targeted, the calibration was nearly flawless. The room where these findings were presented fell into an uneasy silence. This wasn't just about technological intrusion. It suggested strategy, intent, a long-term objective that extended beyond curiosity. If someone could map the monarchy's air routes digitally, they possessed leverage. They could intimidate without acting, threaten without leaving fingerprints. And leverage in the modern age is power. Speculation intensified. Was this geopolitical pressure disguised as cyber curiosity? A foreign adversary signaling capability without open confrontation? Or a decentralized network testing vulnerabilities for future exploitation? The domestic origin of the initial relay did not eliminate external involvement. It only complicated it. Proxies, cutouts, layers of deception. The architecture of modern digital warfare thrives on plausible deniability. The pilot, reviewing the expanded timeline, felt a cold realization settle in. What he experienced in the cockpit had not been a random brush with danger. It was the culmination of months of unseen preparation. The signal that shadowed George's aircraft had confidence. It behaved as though it already understood the system's limits. This wasn't coincidence. It was escalation. For William, the symbolism was unmistakable. Targeting George was not just operational, it was psychological. The heir's heir represents continuity, stability, the promise of decades yet to unfold. By shadowing his flight, whoever orchestrated this intrusion had delivered a message. We can reach you. We can watch you. We can test you. It was intimidation wrapped in silence. And perhaps that was the most unsettling aspect. There had been no ransom demand, no public claim, no manifesto, just capability displayed, then withdrawn. A warning without words. William understood the language immediately. In politics and power, Symbolic gestures often carry more weight than overt aggression. The message did not need explanation. It was a demonstration of access. As the investigation gained momentum, expanding beyond cybersecurity into intelligence briefings and diplomatic channels, one thing became certain: this was bigger than a single flight, bigger than a technical breach. It was a strategic move on a chessboard most citizens never see. And just as the monarchy prepared to tighten its defenses and pursue the unseen architect more aggressively, something unexpected happened: the leak. It appeared first as a vague aviation rumor online, then a cryptic post, then headlines. Within hours, speculation erupted across global media. A security incident involving the future king's son. The palace had lost control of the narrative. And the very exposure they feared was now unfolding in real time, faster than any official response could contain. The initial spark was almost forgettable: a thread on an aviation enthusiast forum. A user with no verified identity mentioned unusual signal activity tied to a recent royal flight. No names. No accusations. Just technical language that only insiders would recognize. But in the digital age, fragments spread faster than facts. Screenshots circulated. Bloggers amplified. Analysts speculated. And suddenly, what had been a classified investigation became public curiosity. Within hours, major outlets were drawing connections. The timeline of the anonymous post matched the date of George's recent journey. Aviation experts were invited to comment. Cybersecurity panels debated the plausibility of encrypted aircraft being mirrored mid-flight. The phrase "targeted interference" began appearing in headlines, cautiously framed as rumor but charged with implication. The palace press office moved swiftly but carefully. Their statement was measured, acknowledging routine technical reviews without confirming a breach. It was not a denial, but it was not an admission. A linguistic tightrope meant to calm without conceding. To seasoned observers, it sounded defensive. And in the vacuum of clarity, speculation thrives. Public reaction escalated. Social media fractured into outrage and fear. Parents imagined their own children in that sky. Supporters demanded transparency. Critics accused the monarchy of withholding truth. Hashtags trended. Commentary panels questioned the strength of royal security in a modern digital battlefield. The narrative slipped beyond containment. Conspiracy theories layered themselves onto the unfolding story. Some claimed foreign interference meant to destabilize the crown. Others suggested internal sabotage, a mole within palace walls. A few darker voices framed it as a rehearsal for something worse. Each theory, regardless of credibility, added pressure. The line between fact and fiction blurred under the glare of relentless attention. Inside secure corridors, tension spiked. Investigators now faced a dual battle, tracking the source of the interference while managing a rapidly inflamed public sphere. The leak itself raised new questions. Who had access to enough detail to describe signal triangulation? Was it an external observer piecing together fragments, or someone closer to the core? Then came the most dangerous twist. A media outlet published a description of the pilot, unnamed but identifiable to those within aviation circles. Former RAF. Decorated. Trusted by William. It was enough for online communities to begin narrowing possibilities. His quiet loyalty was suddenly at risk of exposure. He had never sought recognition. Now he faced potential scrutiny, not for wrongdoing, but for telling the truth. The palace scrambled to shield his identity, but the damage was nearly done. The very man who raised the alarm could become collateral in a storm he did not create. And William understood the gravity instantly. If the pilot were publicly identified, it would shift the narrative from systemic vulnerability to individual blame. The monarchy was losing control of the story. And faced with chaos escalating by the hour, William made a decision that stunned even his closest advisors. In a move that broke centuries of royal instinct, William stepped forward, not with rage, not with blame, but with clarity. A controlled acknowledgement of attempted signal interference during George's flight. It was measured, restrained, yet unmistakably firm. The message was simple. The crown had been tested, and it would not be intimidated. Before the statement ever reached the public, William gathered his security leadership in private. The atmosphere was tense, thick with competing strategies and wounded pride. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. But his words carried weight. He spoke of responsibility not just to protect his family, but to protect trust. The monarchy could not project invulnerability while quietly scrambling behind closed doors. Nor could it allow digital threats to define its posture. "We adapt," he told them. "We do not retreat." It was not theatrical. It was deliberate. A shift from reactive defense to proactive resolve. When the public acknowledgement came, it was crafted with surgical precision. No sensational language. No operational details. Just a confirmation that a minor, attempted signal interference had been detected, addressed, and investigated. The tone was steady, confident. It reframed the narrative. Instead of a monarchy caught off guard, it became a monarchy alert and responsive. Instead of secrecy, there was selective transparency. Critics had demanded clarity. William gave them just enough and no more. The impact was immediate. Media speculation lost some of its volatility. Outrage softened into cautious respect. By stepping forward himself, William prevented the story from spiraling into uncontrolled accusation. He did not hide behind press secretaries. He owned the moment. Simultaneously, visible security adjustments were implemented. Flight operations were restructured. Escort patterns subtly changed. Public appearances hinted at increased vigilance without descending into alarm. The message was psychological as much as practical. Protection had intensified. Anyone watching would see it. Behind the scenes, collaboration with intelligence agencies deepened. What had started as a palace-contained investigation expanded into a coordinated national effort. Cybersecurity divisions analyzed overlapping threat signatures. Diplomatic channels quietly assessed geopolitical angles. The incident became part of a broader conversation about modern warfare where battles are fought not with weapons, but with code. Aviation encryption protocols were accelerated through emergency review. Firewalls were upgraded. Real-time anomaly detection systems were enhanced. The digital perimeter hardened, not just for George, but for every member of the royal household. What had been considered secure was now reinforced with urgency. And then there was the pilot. Rather than distancing the palace from him to reduce liability, William made a choice that surprised many. He formally commended him. Not publicly paraded, not thrust into media glare, but recognized within official circles for vigilance and integrity. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Loyalty and truth would not be punished. They would be honored. In doing so, William reshaped the internal culture. Security was no longer about suppressing uncomfortable discoveries. It was about confronting them. That decision strengthened morale, but it also signaled something deeper, a refusal to allow fear to dictate action. Yet even as new safeguards locked into place and public confidence stabilized, a heavier question lingered beneath the surface. Because strengthening defenses answers how to protect, it does not answer who dared to breach them. And even as the monarchy steadied itself, one question remained: who had dared to test the future king? The investigation continues. Names remain classified, motives obscured, but the breach changed something fundamental. It shattered the illusion that royal blood guarantees invincibility. And for William, it cemented a truth he can never forget. The threats of the modern age are silent, digital, and patient. The skies may look clear, but danger no longer needs to be visible to strike. Behind sealed doors, intelligence teams still analyze fragments of data, chasing digital fingerprints that dissolve as quickly as they appear. Reports circulate through encrypted channels. Briefings are delivered in measured tones. No arrests have been announced. No adversary publicly accused. The silence is strategic, but it is also unsettling. Because when answers remain hidden, imagination fills the void. What officials now acknowledge privately is that this incident was not an anomaly of technology, it was a signal of evolution. The battlefield has shifted. Security is no longer defined by gates, guards, or physical perimeters. It is defined by code, by invisible access points, by vulnerabilities measured in milliseconds. The monarchy, an institution built on centuries of tradition, has been forced to confront a 21st century threat that respects no history and fears no ceremony. For William, the transformation has been personal as much as political. The father who reacted with disbelief has become a strategist who anticipates the next move before it unfolds. He studies briefings with sharper focus. He asks harder questions. He challenges assumptions that once seemed settled. The breach did not weaken him. It hardened him. Not into paranoia, but into preparedness. He understands now that protection is not a static achievement. It is a moving target. George, shielded from the full complexity of what occurred, carries on with the resilience of youth. Increased security surrounds him more tightly than before, yet it is woven carefully into his routine. The goal is normalcy, even if normal now requires extraordinary vigilance. There is a quiet strength in that balance, allowing a child to grow without burdening him with invisible wars fought in his name. Within palace operations, reforms have been implemented with subtle permanence. Flight protocols rewritten, encryption systems re-engineered, clearance structures reviewed and refined. What began as crisis has become catalyst. Royal travel will never again rely on assumptions of untouchability. Every journey now carries an added layer of scrutiny, an awareness that digital shadows may linger beyond sight, and perhaps that is the deepest shift of all the loss of illusion. For generations, the monarchy endured physical threats, assassination plots, public unrest, political turmoil. Those dangers were visible, tangible, confrontable. This new adversary is different. It does not storm gates. It does not issue proclamations. It watches, learns, waits. William knows that the greatest defense is not denial, but adaptation. The crown cannot retreat into secrecy nor posture as impervious. It must evolve as swiftly as the threats that test it. Because the breach was more than a technical episode. It was a warning shot fired without sound. And in a world where even a child's flight can be shadowed, the monarchy's greatest battles may no longer be fought on the ground, but in the invisible space above it.